My son said I was getting too rigid, so I became flexible, moved away and stopped being their free babysitter. If you're watching this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My journey might be exactly what you need to hear today. I stood at the window of my small, sterile apartment in Austin, clutching the framed photo of Robert, my husband of 40 years, now gone 5 years. The Texas sunset looked wrong, nothing like the gentle fade of light over Monterey Bay that had comforted me each evening since Robert's passing. "It's just temporary," I whispered to his photograph before tucking it into the drawer. "Just 3 or 4 months," David had promised, "just until they found proper childcare for my grandchildren." 3 weeks earlier, during our Sunday video call, my son's face had filled my screen, desperation etched in lines I didn't remember seeing before. "Mom, please, I need you in Austin. This promotion is everything I've worked for." But with the divorce and joint custody, his voice cracked. "I can't manage the kids alone while getting established. It's just for a few months." "But what about my house, my garden, the book club?" My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. "Mom, Emma and Noah need their grandmother. I need you." His eyes, so like his father's, pleaded silently. "What about finances, David? Austin is expensive." He waved dismissively. "Don't worry about that now. We'll figure everything out when you get here. Promise." That promise hung in the air of my barren apartment now. I'd rented out my beloved seaside cottage, temporarily of course, packed 3 suitcases of necessities, and flown to Texas, leaving behind the life I'd carefully rebuilt after becoming a widow. My first morning in Austin, I'd awoken to David's hurried instructions as he dropped off Emma, barely 11 months old, and Noah, a spirited 2-year-old. "Emergency numbers are on the fridge. Amanda will pick them up around 7, maybe 8 if court runs late. You're a lifesaver, Mom." A quick kiss on my cheek, and he was gone, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and 2 confused children staring at their equally bewildered grandmother. By the end of that first week, I'd established a wobbly routine. Up at 5:30 to prepare before David dropped the children at 6:15. 12 to 14 hours of childcare followed, often extending when either David or Amanda ran late without warning. Evenings spent alone in an apartment that felt nothing like home, too exhausted to even call my friends back in California. When I finally worked up the courage to mention financial assistance with my rent, David's face clouded over. "Mom, the divorce is bleeding me dry. Can we discuss this later?" Then, checking his buzzing phone, "I've got to take this call." Tonight marked 3 weeks in Austin. 3 weeks of increasingly longer days, of being called rigid when I suggested consistent schedules for the children's sake, of watching David and Amanda live their separate lives while I held theirs together. I turned from the window, surveying the apartment I could barely afford for much longer. On the kitchen counter lay the utility bills I'd received today, alongside my dwindling bank statement. My finger traced Robert's face through the drawer's gap. "Just temporary," I repeated, but this time an unfamiliar chill crept up my spine as I wondered, what if temporary wasn't in my son's vocabulary anymore? "Grandma, look!" Noah pointed at a bird outside the window, his chubby finger smudging the glass I'd cleaned yesterday. I smiled despite my exhaustion. 2 months had passed since my move to Austin, and the dark circles under my eyes had become permanent fixtures. "Yes, sweetheart, that's a blue jay." I glanced at the clock, 7:45 p.m. Amanda was late, again. No text, no call. The apartment door swung open just as Emma, now 13 months old, began fussing for her evening bottle. Amanda strode in, designer briefcase in one hand, phone in the other. "Sorry, meeting ran long." She didn't look up from her screen. "Has she eaten?" "Twice. She's ready for her final bottle and bed." I kept my voice neutral, though frustration bubbled beneath the surface. Amanda finally looked up, frowning at Emma squirming in my arms. "You shouldn't hold her so much. I read that it creates dependency issues." I bit my tongue. Last week it was my outdated feeding schedule. The week before, my excessive reading to Noah. Every parenting choice questioned, yet I was expected to provide 12 hours of daily childcare without complaint. "She has a slight fever. Children need comfort when they're unwell." Amanda rolled her eyes. "Mom blogs, Susan? Really?" She gathered the children's bags. "David's working late tonight. Some big client dinner. The 3rd this week." I nodded, too tired to point out that this extended my day to 14 hours without notice. After they left, I sank onto the couch, surrounded by scattered toys and the lingering scent of baby formula. My phone buzzed, a text from Patricia, my closest friend in Monterey. "Book club misses you. When are you coming home?" Home. The word pierced my chest. When had I last tended my beloved garden? Walked along the shoreline at sunrise? Had coffee with friends who saw me as Susan, not just as a convenient childcare solution? I opened my banking app, wincing at the balance. The rent here was astronomical, $2,300 monthly plus utilities, and David's vague promises of financial assistance remained just that, vague promises. Between rent, groceries, and occasional necessities for the children that neither David nor Amanda remembered to provide, my monthly expenses had nearly doubled from what they'd been in Monterey. At this rate, my carefully managed savings would be depleted in 6 more months. Last Sunday, I'd gathered my courage during our family dinner. "David, we should discuss some sort of stipend for childcare. My expenses here are—" "Mom." His tone carried that edge of impatience. "We're family. This is what family does. Besides, Amanda and I are stretched thin with the divorce settlement." Later that same evening, I'd overheard him on the phone, excitedly discussing a weekend golf trip to Scottsdale with colleagues. The contradiction made my stomach tighten. My calendar notification interrupted my thoughts. 2 months in Austin today. 2 months beyond the temporary arrangement David had promised. I shuffled to the bathroom, barely recognizing the woman in the mirror, hair unkempt, posture slumped, eyes dulled by exhaustion, and something worse, resignation. "What happened to you, Susan Miller?" I whispered to my reflection. The answer came in David's voice, echoing from last week. "Mom, you're becoming so inflexible lately. You need to understand we have demanding careers." Inflexible. The word that once felt like criticism now whispered of possibility. Perhaps it was time for me to redefine what flexibility meant, not just mine, but theirs too. I straightened my shoulders, meeting my own gaze with newfound resolve. Something had to change, and if no one else would initiate it, perhaps it was time I did. "Grandma, why do stars hide during the day?" Noah's innocent question hung between us as we sat on the apartment balcony. 4 months had passed since my arrival in Austin, and these quiet moments with my grandchildren remained the sole bright spots in increasingly difficult days. "They're always there, sweetheart. The sun just outshines them." I pulled him closer, his nearly 2.5-year-old frame fitting perfectly against my side. Emma, now 15 months old, slept peacefully in her portable crib nearby, unaware of the complex emotions swirling through her grandmother's heart. Inside, my phone buzzed insistently. David calling for the 3rd time tonight. I let it go to voicemail, savoring these final minutes before bedtime. Noah's eyes drooped as I carried him to bed. "Love you, Grandma," he mumbled before drifting off. My heart constricted. These children were blameless in this situation. Yet increasingly, I felt my resentment seeping into even our precious moments together. I finally answered David's 4th call. "Mom, where were you? I've been calling for an hour." "Putting Noah to bed," I replied evenly. "Is everything all right? I need you to take the kids this weekend. Amanda's mother is in town, but she doesn't want to deal with children, and I have that golf tournament I told you about, the one he'd mentioned in passing yesterday, assuming without asking that I'd be available." I gripped the phone tighter. "David, this weekend is the first time in 4 months that I've made plans for myself. Remember the art class I mentioned?" His scoff was audible. "An art class? Mom, this is important. It's networking for my career. My class is important to me, David." Silence stretched between us before he replied, his voice taking on that cajoling tone I'd come to recognize as manipulation. "Mom, I thought you came to Austin to help us. We need you to be flexible here." That word again. Flexible. As if flexibility only worked in one direction. "I've been flexible for 4 months, David. I've worked 12-hour days without compensation. I've canceled plans, rearranged my life, depleted my savings." "You're making it sound like we're exploiting you," he interrupted, voice sharp. "This is family, not some business arrangement." After we hung up, I sat on the balcony alone, trembling with suppressed emotions. Family. The word he wielded like a weapon whenever I attempted to establish boundaries. The next morning, a pediatrician's appointment for Noah became the tipping point. As we waited in the examination room, the doctor entered, glancing between Noah and me. "And you are?" he asked kindly. Before I could answer, Amanda swept in, 20 minutes late. She's the grandmother, she interjected breathlessly. She helps out since she's retired and has plenty of free time. Plenty of free time. As if my life held no value beyond childcare availability. As if the art classes I'd canceled, the friends I'd neglected, the financial security I'd sacrificed meant nothing. That evening, I discovered David's mail scattered across the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping, merely tidying up, when a bank statement caught my eye. The highlighted line showed a recent deposit, $75,000, his promotion bonus received 2 months ago. 2 months during which he'd consistently evaded discussions about helping with my rent. 2 months of money is tight excuses. 2 months of watching my savings dwindle while working without compensation. I stood frozen, staring at the number until the digits blurred. The betrayal hit me with physical force. My knees actually buckled, forcing me to grip the counter for support. A wave of nausea rose in my throat as I processed the magnitude of the deception. This wasn't mere oversight or forgetfulness. It was calculated exploitation of my love and willingness to help. With shaking hands, I took a photo of the statement with my phone before carefully replacing it exactly as I'd found it. Tears of rage and hurt burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. This moment required clarity, not emotional clouding. "Is this who we've become?" I whispered, thinking of Robert and how disappointed he would be in the son we'd raised together. The son who now thought nothing of watching his mother deplete her retirement savings while pocketing a substantial bonus. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my small kitchen table, making calculations by the dim light above the stove. The financial reality was stark and unavoidable. At current rates, I would exhaust my entire savings within 18 months. After a lifetime of careful planning for a secure retirement, I was on track to financial precarity, all because I'd trusted family to treat me fairly. By morning, something fundamental had shifted inside me. The compliant, accommodating Susan had receded, replaced by a woman with clear eyes and a steely resolve. "No more," I promised myself. "This ends now. Emma's running a fever of 101, and Noah won't stop crying. I need you to come home early, David." I balanced the phone between my ear and shoulder while pressing a cool cloth to Emma's forehead. At 16 months, she'd become clingy when ill, while Noah at nearly 3 had developed a sympathetic fussiness whenever his sister was unwell. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a presentation for the executive team." Irritation laced his voice. "Can't you handle it? Millions of mothers do this every day." "I'm not their mother," I reminded him quietly. "And I've been handling everything for 5 months now. We'll discuss this later." The call ended abruptly. 5 months. 5 months beyond the temporary arrangement we'd initially discussed. 5 months of increasingly brazen exploitation masked as family obligation. That night, after both children finally slept, I confronted David in the kitchen. "We need to talk about my financial situation. My savings are nearly depleted." He barely glanced up from his laptop. "Not now, Mom. The divorce has me strapped." "David, I can't continue paying rent in Austin indefinitely. We need a plan." He sighed dramatically, finally meeting my gaze. "Maybe you should look for a cheaper place then, or get a part-time job during the kids' naps." He returned to his screen, conversation evidently finished. "Could we at least establish a consistent schedule? I need some predictability." David chuckled without looking up. "Why? It's not like you have anything else going on." Then, still typing, "You're getting pretty rigid, Mom. Flexibility works better for everyone." His casual dismissal struck like a physical blow. I retreated to my bedroom, heart pounding with an unfamiliar emotion, not just hurt, but something sharper. Indignation, rage. At 3 a.m., sleepless and restless, I studied my reflection in the bathroom mirror. When had those deep lines formed around my mouth? When had my eyes lost their sparkle? When had I started moving like someone decades older than my 66 years? Morning brought an unexpected discovery. While preparing breakfast, I noticed David's laptop open on the counter, an email chain visible on screen between him and Amanda. Mom's house in Monterey would sell for at least $1.2 million in this market. We should suggest she invest in the kids' future. She could convert our basement into an apartment for herself. Win-win since we need full-time childcare anyway. Good angle. She's getting restless lately. Better move on this before she decides to go back to California. My stomach lurched violently. I rushed to the bathroom, barely making it before emptying the contents of my stomach. Once the physical reaction subsided, I sat on the cold tile floor, trembling with a potent mixture of shock, betrayal, and fury. Not only were they exploiting my present, they were actively conspiring to appropriate my future, my home, my financial independence, the one asset that guaranteed my security in old age. I allowed myself 5 full minutes of unrestrained tears, the first time I'd truly broken down since arriving in Austin. The grief was multi-layered, mourning the son I thought I knew, the relationship I'd believed we had, the respect I'd assumed was mutual. When the tears subsided, a strange calm descended. I returned to the kitchen and quietly closed the laptop, leaving it exactly as I'd found it. Then I retrieved a notebook from my bedroom and began to write, methodically documenting everything. Hours worked, promises broken, comments made, the promotion bonus amount, and now, this planned theft disguised as investment in the kid's future. The pages filled quickly, a damning chronicle of escalating exploitation. As I wrote, a plan began to form, not born of vengeance, but of self-preservation. This wasn't about punishing David and Amanda. It was about protecting myself from people who had demonstrated they would not protect me. That afternoon, during the children's nap time, I made 3 important calls. First to Eleanor, my friend and real estate agent in Monterey, inquiring about rental possibilities for my house while retaining partial use. Then to an attorney specializing in elder law, recommended by the Senior Citizens Resource Center I'd found online. Finally, to my bank in California to discuss security measures for my accounts and assets. I'm not overreacting, I assured the sympathetic attorney, who had heard similar stories countless times. I have documented evidence of their intentions. You're being admirably proactive, Mrs. Miller, she replied. Too many people in your situation wait until it's too late. That night, as David mumbled another excuse about working late, I smiled pleasantly. Take all the time you need, I told him. I'm learning to be more flexible. The double meaning was lost on him, of course, but for the first time in months, I felt something beyond resignation and resentment. I felt powerful, and I was just getting started. Susan, you're not alone in this. Janet's voice through my earbuds was reassuring as I folded laundry. I discovered the online support group for family caregivers 3 weeks ago through a pamphlet at the senior center where I'd sought advice about protecting my assets. Our virtual meetings had become my lifeline. My daughter did the same thing, expected free childcare while planning to sell my house from under me, continued Janet. Setting boundaries wasn't betrayal, it was self-preservation. After disconnecting, I opened my personal tablet, purchased with my own money specifically to keep documentation David couldn't access, and navigated to my password-protected folder titled Flexibility Project. Inside were meticulously organized documents, a log of hours worked, averaging 65 weekly, expenses incurred, totaling approximately $24,500 over 5 months, and research on fair market rates for full-time nannies in Austin, between $3,500 to $4,000 monthly for 2 children under 3. Also documented every dismissive comment, every broken promise, every financial deception, including screenshots of David's emails discussing selling my home without my knowledge, evidence I'd gathered when he carelessly left his accounts logged in on the shared family tablet he'd given me for emergencies. 5.5 months into my Austin residency, I was executing a carefully calibrated strategy. Step 1 had been documentation. Step 2, research. Now came Step 3, rebuilding independence. Eleanor had found a solution for my Monterey home, a professional couple willing to rent the main floor while I retained the studio apartment in back. The arrangement would provide income of $3,800 monthly while preserving my eventual return option. The renovations to make the studio fully independent would take about 8 weeks, Eleanor had explained, but it's an investment in your future flexibility. I'd authorized the work immediately, using a portion of my remaining savings. The projected completion date was still months away, but knowing it was in progress gave me a concrete timeline and hope. I'd also begun reclaiming small pieces of my identity. During nap time, I'd enrolled in online courses, financial planning for seniors, digital photography, even child development certification. Ironically, using my unpaid childcare hours to become formally qualified for work I'd been doing gratis. 3 times weekly, I'd hired a neighborhood teenager for 2 hours so I could attend water aerobics at the community center. The physical revival mirrored my mental awakening, muscles strengthening alongside resolve. The transformation wasn't just internal. I'd scheduled a salon appointment, replacing my matronly hairstyle with a sophisticated silver bob. Started wearing the bright colors Robert had always loved instead of the faded pastels that had become my uniform. Small changes, hardly noticeable individually, but collectively signaling a woman reclaiming herself. "Susan, you look different somehow," remarked Amanda during a rare moment of actual conversation. "Have you lost weight?" "Just finding myself again," I replied, with a smile that revealed nothing of my inner calculations. Today marked a significant milestone in my plan. After confirming my rental agreement in Monterey, I began introducing subtle changes to my availability. When David texted asking if I could keep the children overnight this weekend, I responded with unprecedented firmness. "I'm sorry, that won't be possible. I have a commitment Saturday evening. I've arranged for Mrs. Rodriguez from 4B to babysit. Her references are excellent." His response was immediate. "What commitment? You never mentioned plans." "It's a virtual reunion with my book club friends. I've canceled on them 3 times already for your last-minute requests." The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before his message arrived. "Fine, but we need to talk about your availability going forward." Perfect. Exactly the conversation I'd been preparing for. That evening, I made a final crucial call to Patricia back in Monterey. "How quickly could the studio be ready for occupancy in an emergency?" I asked, keeping my voice low despite being alone. "The contractors say minimum 8 weeks for full renovation, but they could make it basically functional in about 6 weeks, if absolutely necessary." "Are you coming home sooner than planned, Susan?" Home. The word resonated through me like a tuning fork striking the perfect note. "I'm developing contingency plans," I said carefully. "The situation here is evolving." As I ended the call, Emma's cry came through the baby monitor. I moved to comfort her, heart full of contradictory emotions. I loved these children fiercely, but I'd finally recognized a fundamental truth. I could not be a healthy presence in their lives if I continued allowing myself to be diminished in the process. Something had to change, and for the first time in decades, I was prioritizing my needs alongside everyone else's, a radical act of self-compassion that felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I've rented out the main portion of my house in Monterey," I announced casually over dinner, 6 months into my Austin residence. "A lovely retired professor and his wife. They're taking excellent care of my garden." The clatter of David's fork against his plate punctuated the sudden silence. Amanda's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. Noah, now 3, continued chattering about dinosaurs, while Emma, at 17 months, busily smashed peas on her high chair tray, both blissfully unaware of the adult's tension. "You never mentioned you were planning to rent it out," David finally said, his voice carefully controlled. I smiled, spreading jam on my toast with deliberate precision. "It was a recent decision. The rental income will help offset my expenses here, since we haven't revisited that discussion." "I thought you might consider selling, actually," Amanda interjected. "Property values in California are at an all-time high. You could invest the proceeds for the children's college funds." The trap was so transparent I almost laughed. Instead, I took a measured sip of coffee. "The rental agreement includes me retaining the studio apartment in back. It's being renovated now. My own little sanctuary for when I return to California." David's expression tightened. "Return? Mom, we were hoping you'd consider a more permanent arrangement here. The kids need stability." "I completely agree about stability," I replied evenly, "which is why I've researched several excellent childcare centers nearby. Bright Horizons has an opening next month. I've scheduled tours for both of you next week." The atmosphere shifted instantly. David exchanged glances with Amanda, the same conspiratorial look I'd seen countless times when they thought I wasn't watching. "Professional childcare is ridiculously expensive," Amanda protested. "We're talking $4,000 monthly for 2 children. I nodded sympathetically. "Roughly equivalent to my market value as a full-time nanny with over 40 years of childcare experience. Except, of course, I've been working for free." David's face flushed. "That's not fair. We've provided housing." "I pay my own rent," I corrected gently, "and utilities, and expenses. In fact, I've calculated that my savings have decreased by approximately $24,500 since moving here, money that would have sustained me for over a year in Monterey. You're treating this like a business transaction, David snapped, anger finally breaking through his composed facade. This is family, I repeated thoughtfully. Yes, that relationship where love and respect flow in both directions, where one member doesn't exploit another's financial vulnerability, where boundaries are honored rather than manipulated. Amanda stood abruptly. I need to make some calls. She retreated to the living room, phone already pressed to her ear. David leaned forward, voice lowered. What's gotten into you lately? You've changed. I've become more flexible, I replied, using his favorite word deliberately, adapting to circumstances, evolving my perspective. Later that evening, my phone lit up with a notification, an email from Janet in my support group, forwarding information about a senior advocacy panel seeking speakers to share experiences about financial autonomy in late life. Your journey could help others, she wrote. Consider sharing your story. I smiled at the synchronicity. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined speaking publicly about anything, let alone my private family struggles. But the woman I was becoming, stronger, clearer, more defined, was surprising me daily with her emerging capabilities. In the bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection with new appreciation. The physical changes were subtle but significant. Straighter posture, more direct gaze, the return of color to my cheeks. But the most profound transformation remained invisible. The internal recalibration of my worth. I opened my calendar app, scrolling forward 3 months, and created a new event. Studio completion date. The contractors had confirmed they could complete the essential work by then, making my escape hatch viable. I set multiple reminders, a digital affirmation of my commitment to myself. That night, I received a text from David that confirmed my growing suspicions. Mom, we should talk about your house in Monterey. I have some investment ideas that could benefit all of us. The timing, right after I'd announced renting rather than selling, was hardly coincidental. I didn't respond immediately. Let him wonder. Let him worry. For the first time in our relationship, I held information he wanted but couldn't demand. The power shift was subtle but unmistakable. For the first time since arriving in Austin, I fell asleep without anxiety clutching at my chest. Whatever challenges the coming weeks would bring, I faced them not as the accommodating mother desperate to please, but as a woman who had rediscovered her inherent value and was prepared to insist that others recognize it too. I found your research on child care centers, David said, his voice tight as he tossed the folder onto my kitchen counter. 7 months into my Austin stay, the power dynamic between us had shifted noticeably. Were you planning to tell me you're arranging tours without consulting us? I continued calmly preparing Noah's lunch. I sent you 3 emails about it last week. You didn't respond to any of them, because we've already decided that professional childcare isn't right for the kids. You've decided, I corrected, slicing apple wedges into thin, manageable pieces for Emma, now 18 months old. And that's absolutely your prerogative as their parents. But you should make that choice with complete information about alternatives. David ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. What's happened to you, Mom? You used to be more compliant? I suggested when he trailed off. More understanding of our situation. I set down the knife and faced him directly. I understand your situation perfectly, David. You and Amanda have demanding careers and 2 young children. You need reliable childcare. That's valid. What's not valid is expecting me to provide that care indefinitely without compensation, discussion, or consideration for my financial security. So this is about money? After everything I've done for you over the years, the accusation might have wounded me months ago. Now, I recognized it as manipulative deflection. This is about respect, I replied quietly, and reciprocity, and acknowledging that at 66, I deserve to have my own life, not just exist as an unpaid extension of yours. His expression darkened. The kids will be devastated if you leave. I love Emma and Noah more than words can express. That won't change whether I'm living here or in Monterey. But their emotional well-being doesn't require my financial ruin. Financial ruin? That's ridiculous hyperbole, Mom. I moved to my personal tablet, kept separate from the family tablet he'd given me, and pulled up a spreadsheet I'd prepared. Here are my expenses since moving to Austin compared to my previous budget in Monterey. Here's my savings depletion rate, and here's my projected financial situation in 18 months if nothing changes. The data was irrefutable. Even David, with his selective perception where family obligations were concerned, couldn't deny the mathematical reality. I've also consulted with an elder law attorney, I continued, pressing my advantage while he processed the financial information. She suggested I should be compensated retroactively for childcare services already provided, but I'm not pursuing that option. I'm only looking forward, not backward. His head snapped up. You talked to a lawyer about us. I talked to a lawyer about protecting my interests, I corrected. Just as you and Amanda consulted about potentially selling my house without my knowledge. His expression confirmed what I already knew. He hadn't realized I'd discovered their plans. The shock quickly transformed to defensiveness. That was just brainstorming, Mom. We would never actually— David, I interrupted gently. Please don't compound dishonesty with more dishonesty. I've seen the emails. I know exactly what you were planning. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then toward the door. I have to take this call. Of course, I said, returning to lunch preparation. We can continue this discussion when you're ready to have it honestly. After he left, I texted Eleanor in Monterey for an update on my studio renovation. Her response included photos, fresh paint in my favorite shade of blue, new energy-efficient windows overlooking the garden, built-in bookshelves exactly as I'd specified. The contractors were making good progress, though they'd encountered some plumbing issues that might delay completion by a couple of weeks. That evening, while checking my email on the family tablet, I noticed it was running unusually slowly. A quick check of the system settings revealed the reason. Monitoring software had been installed, presumably to track my online activities. The invasion of privacy should have angered me, but instead, I felt oddly vindicated. Let him see the research I was doing on senior rights and financial independence. Let him understand that I'd been silently observing while he thought I remained oblivious. I continued using the family tablet for innocuous searches while keeping all sensitive communications and documentation on my personal device. The attempted surveillance only confirmed that my caution had been warranted all along. The following morning, I found an envelope on my doorstep containing a check, the first financial contribution from David since my arrival. No note, no acknowledgement, just an amount that covered approximately 1/3 of my monthly expenses. A begrudging concession that came far too late to change the trajectory I'd set in motion. I deposited the check anyway. This wasn't about vindication or punishment. It was about establishing appropriate boundaries in a relationship that had become dangerously unbalanced. Later that week, during my virtual meeting with the senior advocacy group, I shared parts of my experience for the first time with strangers. The supportive nods, the recognition in their eyes, it felt like emerging from isolation into community. What advice would you give others in similar situations? Asked the moderator. I considered carefully before answering. Document everything. Research your options, and remember that love without respect isn't really love at all. It's control wearing a convincing disguise. As the meeting ended, several participants messaged privately, sharing their own stories of family exploitation. One woman's comment particularly resonated. You're giving us permission to prioritize ourselves without guilt. That's revolutionary at our age. Revolutionary. The word echoed as I prepared dinner that evening. A quiet revolution was indeed unfolding, not just in my external circumstances, but in my fundamental understanding of what I deserved from relationships. When Emma reached for me later, her small arms encircling my neck with complete trust, tears pricked my eyes. The impending separation would be painful. But I was increasingly certain that modeling self-respect for my grandchildren might ultimately be the most valuable legacy I could offer them. I don't understand why you need the day off again, David complained over the phone. This is the 3rd time this month. I'm not taking the day off, I corrected him, watching the Texas sunrise from my balcony. I'm unavailable on Thursdays now, as I've mentioned repeatedly. My volunteer position at the senior center is a commitment. But we need you. I'm available Monday through Wednesday and Friday mornings, I interrupted gently but firmly. My schedule is consistent and predictable, which is healthier for the children anyway. 8 months into my stay in Austin, my transformation was comprehensive. I'd established clear boundaries around my time, reconnected with friends both in Monterey and locally, created a budget that preserved my remaining savings. Most importantly, I'd reclaimed my identity beyond grandmother and unpaid caregiver. The volunteer position had been Janet's suggestion, 4 hours weekly helping seniors navigate social service systems. The work was meaningful, utilized my organizational skills, and provided social connection beyond family obligations. Fine, David conceded reluctantly. I'll ask Amanda to adjust her court schedule. After we disconnected, I reviewed my weekly planner. Volunteer work Thursday, water aerobics, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, photography class Tuesday evenings, daily walks, and scheduled childcare hours clearly delineated. The structured days reflected my internal shift from reactive to proactive living. That afternoon, during my volunteer shift, I received an unexpected call from Amanda. "Susan, I need to discuss something important." Her tone was unusually conciliatory. "David and I have been talking. We realize we've taken advantage of your generosity." I waited silently, having learned that uncomfortable silences often revealed more than hasty responses. "We'd like to propose a formal arrangement," she continued. "A monthly stipend, health insurance contribution, and designated days off in exchange for continued child care." The offer surprised me, not its existence, but its timing. After months of dismissing my concerns, they were suddenly acknowledging my value. Something felt suspicious. "That's thoughtful," I replied carefully. "Could you send the details in writing? I'd like to review them properly." Her hesitation was brief, but noticeable. "Of course. We're just trying to find a solution that works for everyone." That evening, I discovered why during my weekly call with Eleanor. "Your tenants love the house and want to extend their lease for 2 years, she reported cheerfully. "And the contractor says, despite the plumbing setback, your studio should be ready in about 7 weeks. "That's wonderful news," I replied, heart lightening. Financial security and housing stability, the 2 factors that had kept me vulnerable, were resolving simultaneously. Then Eleanor added, "Oh, and someone called asking about your property value. Said they were your financial advisor." I froze. "I don't have a financial advisor." I thought that seemed odd, especially when they started asking about whether you might consider selling instead of renting. The pieces clicked into place. David and Amanda weren't suddenly recognizing my value. They were scrambling to prevent my departure. The abrupt offer of compensation was a tactical maneuver to maintain control. The next morning, an email arrived from Amanda containing their proposal, exactly as I'd suspected. The generous stipend was barely half the market rate for full-time childcare. The health insurance contribution was minimal. The designated time off came with caveats about flexibility during busy periods. I responded with a single sentence, "Thank you for the offer. I'll give it appropriate consideration." Later that day, while the children napped, I finalized my exit strategy. Target departure date, 7 weeks from now, aligning with my studio's completion. Moving arrangements researched. Storage unit for non-essential items secured. All executed methodically, without emotional reactivity. At dinner that evening, David mentioned casually, "Mom, we should talk about your house in Monterey. I have some investment ideas that could benefit all of us." I smiled, meeting his gaze directly. "Actually, I have considered my options carefully. Very carefully indeed." Something in my tone must have alerted him. His expression shifted from casual interest to wary assessment. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes, the dawning recognition that his mother was no longer the predictable, manipulable woman he'd always known. "We should discuss this more," he said, reaching for his wine glass. "Yes," I agreed pleasantly. "We certainly should." That night, I received a text from Patricia about a part-time position at the Monterey Community Center's newly formed senior outreach program. "They're looking for someone with organizational skills and empathy," she wrote. "Reminded me immediately of you." The synchronicity felt meaningful. I hadn't planned to work upon returning to Monterey, but the idea of using my growing advocacy skills in a structured, compensated environment appealed deeply. I saved the information, another piece of my evolving future taking shape. As Noah and Emma's laughter echoed from the bathroom where David was giving them their evening bath, I felt the familiar pang of anticipated separation. But underneath that momentary pain lay a deeper certainty. By reclaiming my independence, I was showing these children that love doesn't require self-erasure, a lesson worth any temporary discomfort. "You can't just walk away from your family," David insisted, pacing my small living room. 9 months into my Austin residence, the confrontation I'd been preparing for had finally arrived. Emma, now 20 months old, and Noah, 3.5, were spending the weekend with Amanda's sister, giving us the privacy this conversation required. "I'm not walking away from anyone," I replied calmly, hands steady as I folded laundry. "I'm returning to my home. There's a difference. The kids need you. We need you. The kids need loving, consistent caregivers, which can be provided through the excellent childcare center I've researched. And what you and Amanda need is not unique to me personally. You need affordable childcare that accommodates your demanding schedules." His frustration visibly mounted. "Why are you being so difficult about this? We've offered to pay you half the market rate after 9 months of free labor." I set aside the folded towels and met his gaze directly. "David, I've contributed approximately 2,340 hours of unpaid childcare since arriving in Austin. At standard nanny rates, that's over $35,000 of uncompensated work." He flinched at the precise figures, evidence of my meticulous documentation. "We're family, not employees. Precisely why exploitation is particularly inappropriate." I kept my tone gentle but firm. "Family should protect each other's interests, not undermine them. That's unfair. We've been struggling with the divorce, while you received a $75,000 bonus and planned weekend golf trips." I completed his sentence calmly. The color drained from his face. "You went through my personal information? You left bank statements on the kitchen counter, and your email open on our shared tablet." I shrugged slightly. "I didn't need to snoop, David. You were careless because you assumed I wouldn't notice or understand." He sank onto the sofa, defensive posture crumbling. "What do you want, Mom? Money? We can adjust the offer. What I want isn't negotiable. I want respect, recognition of my value, acknowledgement that at 66, I deserve self-determination and financial security. And you can't have those things here? With your family?" The genuine confusion in his voice nearly broke my heart. He truly didn't understand the fundamental imbalance he'd created, or his role in maintaining it. "Not under the current dynamic," I answered honestly. "Not when my boundaries are consistently dismissed as inflexibility. Not when my financial concerns are treated as inconvenient interruptions." David's phone buzzed. Amanda calling. He silenced it without answering. "When?" he asked quietly. 5 weeks. The studio apartment is nearly ready. My tenants are settled. I've researched flights and moving options." His expression cycled through shock, anger, calculation, and finally, reluctant acceptance. "The kids will be devastated. I'll visit regularly, and you're welcome to bring them to Monterey." I reached for his hand, my first physical gesture of reconciliation. "This isn't punishment, David. It's self-preservation." After he left, I received an unexpected text from Amanda. "Can we talk privately? Just us?" We met the following day at a cafe near her office. Neutral territory. She arrived immaculately dressed but uncharacteristically tentative. "David told me you're leaving," she began without preamble. "I'd like to understand why." I studied her carefully. "Are you asking sincerely or gathering ammunition?" Her surprise at my directness seemed genuine. "Sincerely." David's struggling with this. For the next hour, I explained my perspective calmly, without accusation or emotion. The gradual erosion of my autonomy. The financial impact, the subtle dismissals and invalidations, the discovery of their plans regarding my house. To my surprise, Amanda listened attentively, occasionally nodding in recognition. "I'm an ambitious woman," she said finally. "I understand protecting your interests, but I don't understand why reconciliation isn't possible." "It is possible," I replied, "but not through negotiation or compromise, only through fundamental respect, which begins with accepting my decision to return home." As we parted, she hesitated, then said quietly, "For what it's worth, I've always admired your strength, even when I disagreed with your parenting approaches." The unexpected acknowledgement stayed with me throughout the evening as I finalized arrangements with the moving company. Perhaps reconciliation was possible, not on their terms or timeline, but eventually, once new patterns of interaction had been established. That night, I received an update from Eleanor. The plumbing issues in my studio had been more extensive than initially thought. The contractor needed at least 3 more weeks beyond the projected completion date. This potential delay should have frustrated me, but instead, I felt a strange relief. The additional weeks would allow me to prepare the children more thoroughly for my departure, particularly Noah, who had begun asking increasingly perceptive questions about why Grandma seemed to be organizing her belongings. I adjusted my timeline accordingly, using the extra weeks to both strengthen my position and ease the transition. I began creating photo albums for the children, filled with our memories together. Started introducing them to video calling with my friends in Monterey, normalizing the concept of staying connected across distance. Most importantly, I continued establishing clear boundaries with David and Amanda, no longer deferring to their schedules or accommodating last-minute requests. The message was consistent. I might still be physically present, but the old dynamic had already ended. Their resistance remained strong, but increasingly ineffective. David alternated between sullen withdrawal and desperate attempts at renegotiation. Amanda vacillated between reluctant respect and strategic manipulation. Both were slowly realizing what I had already accepted. Our relationship had fundamentally changed, and there was no going back to the previous imbalance of power. Holding Emma while she slept, I whispered promises to remain present in her life, even from a distance. The path I'd chosen wasn't perfect, but it was necessary, not just for me, but ultimately for all of us. "You've been nominated for our Seniors Advocacy Award," announced Margot, the community center director. "Your presentation last month about financial autonomy for older women resonated deeply with our members." I blinked in surprise, nearly dropping my volunteer badge. 10 months into my Austin journey, 4 weeks from my rescheduled departure, and suddenly I was being recognized for contributions beyond family obligations. "That's very kind, but I haven't done anything special," I protested. Margot shook her head firmly. "You've demonstrated remarkable courage in reclaiming your life. You've documented your journey so others can learn from it, and you've helped numerous seniors in our center understand their rights and options. That deserves recognition." The award ceremony would be held the following week, a community luncheon celebrating various contributions to senior well-being. I hesitated briefly before accepting the invitation. Public recognition felt oddly vulnerable after months of invisible labor. That evening, during dinner with the children, my phone buzzed with the formal invitation. Noah, now nearly 3.5, peered at the screen curiously. "What's that, Grandma?" "I'm receiving an award for helping people," I explained simply. David, overhearing from the kitchen, raised an eyebrow. "An award? For what?" "For my volunteer work at the senior center. I've been helping people understand their financial options and rights." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise mingled with something harder to identify. Recognition, perhaps? Or reassessment? "I didn't realize your volunteer work was so significant," he said carefully. "There's quite a lot you haven't realized," I replied, keeping my tone light for the children's benefit. The ceremony itself was modest, but meaningful. A community luncheon in the senior center's multi-purpose room, decorated with streamlined elegance by volunteers. I'd invited David and Amanda, not expecting either to attend, given their perpetually demanding schedules. To my astonishment, both arrived just as the program began, slipping into seats near the back. Their presence simultaneously comforted and unsettled me. When my name was called, I approached the podium with unexpected steadiness. Looking out at the gathered faces, my newly formed community of volunteers, seniors I'd assisted, members of my support group, I felt a surge of gratitude for this unanticipated chapter in my life. 10 months ago, I arrived in Austin feeling diminished, I began, my voice stronger than anticipated. I'd allowed myself to believe that at 66, my primary value lay in what I could provide to others, not in who I fundamentally am. The story I shared was carefully edited, no names mentioned, no private details revealed, but the essential truth remained intact. How I'd gradually recognized patterns of exploitation, documented my contributions, researched my options, and ultimately reclaimed my autonomy. The most important lesson I've learned is that flexibility isn't the same as erasure, I concluded. We can adapt to changing circumstances without disappearing into other people's needs. We can love our families without sacrificing our financial security. We can be generous without being exploited. The applause was warm and sustained. As I returned to my seat, I caught David's expression, a complex mixture of pride, discomfort, and dawning comprehension. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing me not as his mother, but as an independent woman with wisdom worth sharing. Afterwards, as attendees mingled over coffee and cake, Amanda approached alone. "That was illuminating," she said quietly. "I never considered how our arrangement might appear from your perspective." "Perspective changes everything," I agreed, "including mine. This experience has taught me that I'm capable of much more than I realized." She nodded slowly. "David's struggling with your departure. He grew up with you, always placing his needs first. This new version of you is challenging for him." "Growth is often uncomfortable," I replied, "for everyone involved." Later, as David drove me home, silence hung between us until he finally spoke. "You're really good at this advocacy thing." I had no idea. "Neither did I admitted. "Sometimes we discover our capabilities only when circumstances force us to develop them." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I still don't understand why you can't do that work here, with us." I gazed out the window at the Austin skyline, so different from Monterey's coastline but beautiful in its own way. "Because the greatest gift I can give those grandchildren isn't unlimited availability. It's modeling what healthy boundaries and self-respect look like." As we pulled up to my apartment building, David hesitated, then asked the question he'd been avoiding for weeks. "Will you at least consider visiting regularly?" "Of course," I assured him. "Our relationship isn't ending, David. It's simply transforming into something more balanced." For the first time in months, his smile seemed genuine rather than calculated. A small but significant step toward the new equilibrium I hoped we might eventually establish. That evening, I received another update from Eleanor. The renovations were progressing well after the plumbing issues had been resolved. The studio would definitely be ready within 3 weeks. She'd also forwarded an official application for the part-time position at the Monterey Community Center, with a note that the director was eager to interview me upon my return. As I filled out the application, I realized how much my self-perception had evolved in 10 months. The woman who'd arrived in Austin, believing her only value lay in family service, was now confidently applying for a position helping others navigate exactly the challenges she'd overcome. The transformation wasn't complete. I still struggled with guilt over leaving the children, still battled decades of conditioning that prioritized others' needs above my own. But each step toward independence strengthened my resolve rather than weakening it. Later that night, David called with what sounded like a peace offering. "I've been researching flights to Monterey for the kids and me. Maybe we could visit a month after you're settled? Give you time to get the studio arranged how you like it?" The acknowledgement that my departure was real and his tentative acceptance of it felt like a significant breakthrough. "I'd like that very much," I replied, hearing the emotion in my own voice. "I want them in my life, David, just on terms that respect all of us." "I'm beginning to understand that," he said quietly before hanging up. Progress wouldn't be linear. I had no illusions about the challenges ahead, but for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where genuine reconciliation might be possible. Not today or tomorrow, perhaps not even this year, but eventually, if we all continued growing. "Please reconsider," David said, standing in my nearly empty apartment. 11 months had passed since my arrival in Austin. In 2 weeks, I would board a plane to California, returning to my renovated studio and the life I'd temporarily abandoned. "My decision is made," I replied gently, sealing another box of belongings. "The movers arrive next week." "But we've changed," he insisted. "The childcare stipend, the set schedule, the health insurance contribution. We've addressed your concerns." I set down my packing tape and faced him directly. "Those changes came 10 months too late, David, and only after I demonstrated I was serious about leaving. So this is punishment? Getting back at us for taking advantage of you?" "No," I said firmly. "This is me choosing the life I want rather than the one that's convenient for everyone else. There's a crucial difference." His frustration was palpable. "What about the kids? They adore you. And I adore them. I'll visit regularly. You're welcome in Monterey anytime. We'll have video calls weekly." I touched his arm gently. "This isn't abandonment, David. It's redefinition." "It feels like abandonment," he admitted, vulnerability briefly replacing calculation. "First Amanda with the divorce, now you." For a moment, I glimpsed the little boy beneath the ambitious executive, the child who'd always relied on his mother's unconditional accommodation. My heart softened, but my resolve remained intact. "I understand it feels that way," I acknowledged. "But healthy relationships require mutual respect and boundaries. I've spent this year learning that lesson. Perhaps it's one you need to learn as well." Later that evening, to my surprise, Amanda arrived alone. carrying a small gift bag. A going-away present, she explained awkwardly, and an apology. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover. The card read simply, "Your story deserves to be written on your own terms." We sat on my balcony, sharing wine as the Texas sunset painted the sky in dramatic oranges and purples. Our conversation, for once, felt authentic rather than strategic. "I used to think you were old-fashioned and overly traditional," Amanda admitted. "But watching you reinvent yourself this year has been eye-opening." "It's never too late to rewrite your story," I replied, feeling unexpected kinship with this ambitious young woman who'd so often dismissed my perspectives. "I wish I'd recognized your value sooner," she said quietly. "Not just as childcare, but as a mentor. The way you've handled this entire situation with such dignity. I could learn from that." Her unexpected vulnerability touched me deeply. We all have lessons to teach each other, if we're willing to listen. The following day, 2 weeks before my scheduled departure, was dedicated to precious moments with my grandchildren. I'd created photo albums for each of them, filled with our memories together. For Noah, old enough to understand some version of what was happening, I explained that Grandma was returning to her special house by the ocean. "But will you forget me?" he asked, lower lip trembling. "Never," I promised, holding him close. "Some people are impossible to forget because they live right here." I placed my hand over my heart. "You and Emma will always be there, no matter how far apart we are. Can we visit you at the ocean house?" His eyes brightened at the prospect. "Absolutely. Your daddy is already planning your first trip." Emma, at 22 months, couldn't fully comprehend the upcoming separation, but she sensed the emotional undercurrents. She clung to me more fiercely than usual, her small hands clutching my shirt as if to physically prevent my departure. That evening, David arrived for a family dinner. The conversation remained carefully superficial, focused on practical arrangements for future visits rather than the emotional undercurrents we all felt. As he prepared to leave with the sleepy children, David hesitated in the doorway. "I didn't understand what you were trying to tell me all those months," he said finally, "about respect and boundaries. I'm starting to get it now." "That's a beginning," I acknowledged. "Would you have stayed if we'd handled things differently from the start?" he asked, the question that had clearly been haunting him. I considered carefully before answering. Perhaps, but then I might never have discovered my own capacity for transformation. Sometimes, the most painful circumstances yield the most valuable growth. "Will you at least consider visiting for extended periods, maybe a month in summer and during the holidays?" His tone was hopeful rather than demanding, a subtle but significant shift. "Let's see how our new dynamic develops," I replied, unwilling to make promises that might recreate old patterns. One step at a time. His disappointment was visible but controlled. "That's fair. More than fair, considering everything." After they left, I stood alone in the apartment that had witnessed my remarkable metamorphosis from accommodating grandmother to self-possessed woman. The journey had been neither linear nor easy. There had been moments of doubt, fear, and nearly overwhelming guilt. But through it all, I'd maintained the core conviction that drove every decision. Love without respect isn't love at all. The text from Eleanor that evening confirmed what I already knew in my heart. "Studio is complete, just waiting for you to come home and bring it to life." Home. After 11 months of displacement, the word held renewed power and promise. 2 more weeks, and I would reclaim not just my physical space, but the full scope of my identity. Grandmother, yes, but also friend, community member, advocate, woman with dreams still unfulfilled, and contributions still to make. Tomorrow would bring more packing, more explanations to the children, more inevitable resistance from David despite his apparent acceptance. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel nothing but quiet pride in the journey I'd navigated, and anticipation for the next chapter about to begin. The Pacific breeze carries the scent of salt and cypress through my open windows as I arrange freshly cut flowers in a vase, a simple pleasure reclaimed in the 6 months since my return to Monterey. My studio apartment behind the main house is small, but perfectly suited to my needs, with large windows overlooking the garden I've lovingly restored. My tenants, a retired history professor and his wife, have become friends rather than merely financial arrangements. They respect my privacy while including me in occasional dinner parties where my perspectives are valued rather than tolerated. The transformation that began in Austin has continued to unfold here. My volunteer work with the local senior advocacy organization evolved into a part-time paid position 3 months ago. 2 days weekly, I coordinate their financial literacy program, and once monthly, I lead workshops for older women navigating late-life transitions, sharing hard-won wisdom about boundaries, documentation, and self-advocacy. My phone chimes with a FaceTime call. Noah's eager face fills the screen, Emma bouncing beside him. At 4 years old, Noah has become remarkably proficient with technology. Emma, now 2.5, still needs his help, but insists on being part of every call. "Grandma, we're coming tomorrow," he announces excitedly. "Daddy says we'll be there by lunchtime." This will be their 3rd visit in 6 months, evidence that relationships can indeed transform rather than sever when boundaries are properly established. Each visit has been easier than the last, with David gradually adjusting to our new dynamic. The resistance I'd anticipated hasn't disappeared entirely. There are still occasional comments about my beautiful house with plenty of room, and how the children would love to spend the whole summer in Monterey. But these hints at the old expectation of unlimited availability are now met with gentle but firm redirection rather than guilty acquiescence. After we disconnect, I check my preparations for their arrival. The guest room in the main house, arranged with my tenants' generous permission, is ready with children's books and small toys. The refrigerator is stocked with family-friendly meals. The tide schedule is printed for optimal beach time. As I walk along the shoreline that afternoon, my daily ritual reclaimed, I reflect on the extraordinary journey of the past 18 months. The desperate call from David that began everything. The gradual erosion of my autonomy in Austin. The awakening that led me back to myself. The careful reconstruction of family relationships on healthier foundations. Patricia joins me for our regular sunset walk, our friendship seamlessly resumed after my return. "You seem lighter these days," she observes. "More present." "I am," I acknowledge. "I've learned to value my own company as much as I value others." That evening, I receive an unexpected email from Amanda. Since the divorce was finalized, her communications have been limited to practical matters regarding the children's visits. This message is different, more personal. "I wanted you to know that I've been reflecting on the lessons from our time together," she writes. "Your example has helped me establish better boundaries in my own professional life. I recently declined a case that would have consumed me entirely, choosing instead to preserve time for myself and the children. It felt revolutionary." I smile at the word, the same one that resonated so deeply during my transformation. Revolution indeed, not the violent overthrow of existing structures, but the steady, determined recalibration of imbalanced relationships. The journey hasn't been without setbacks. David still occasionally reverts to old patterns when stressed or overwhelmed. Our relationship remains a work in progress, with moments of genuine connection interspersed with frustrating regressions. But unlike before, I now have the emotional and financial independence to maintain healthy boundaries through these challenging periods. Before bed, I review my calendar for the coming month. Family visits carefully scheduled, work commitments honored, personal time protected. The balance feels right, sustainable rather than sacrificial. On my bedside table sits the leather journal Amanda gave me as a parting gift, now half filled with reflections on my journey. Tonight, I add another entry. The greatest misconception about flexibility is that it requires us to bend until we break. True flexibility is balanced, a mutual accommodation that preserves the essential integrity of everyone involved. At 67, I've finally learned that lesson. The most valuable gift I can offer my family isn't unconditional accommodation, but modeling what healthy love looks like. Love that honors both self and other. As I drift toward sleep, I feel profound gratitude for the painful lessons that catalyzed my transformation. The exploitative arrangement that brought me to Austin became, paradoxically, the vehicle for my liberation, proving that it's never too late to reclaim your story, reset boundaries, and discover new dimensions of yourself. Tomorrow, my family arrives, not as entitled consumers of my time and energy, but as welcome visitors in the life I've mindfully created. The relationship we're building now is healthier than what we left behind, more honest, more balanced, more genuinely loving. In the gentle darkness of my Monterey sanctuary, I whisper a truth that would have seemed impossible 18 months ago. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel and don't miss the next video with more stories that will touch your heart.